Greetings everyone, I'm Historical Method Man, and this is my original capstone research, Animatronics, Theme Parks, and Race, representations of non-white and non-Western bodies in imagineered spaces. New debates over cultural representations in theme parks have continued in the 20th century, for the first time sparking action from entertainment corporations to revise and refurbish socially outdated segments of their attractions. At its American parks in 2022, Disney altered the Jungle Cruise to make their parks more inclusive, removing the egregious animatronics of Trader Sam, the head salesman of the jungle, and diversifying their cast of animatronics. A statement provided by Disney on the attraction's revision reported their intentions. Imagineers are addressing negative depictions of native peoples while adding a humorous storyline that follows the adventure of a Jungle Cruise skipper. Guests will also find this group of adventurers to be diverse in background and fields of interest. Audiences, customers, are noticing unfair racial representations, and theme parks are beginning to respond. Similar refurbishments removed scenes that depicted sex trafficking in Pirates of the Caribbean. These attraction refurbishments were the inspiration for this research. The first aim of this project is to highlight cross-cultural depictions, perceptions, and receptions in the themed entertainment industry as a continuity from the existing historiography on World's Fairs. Second, this project extends the bodily implications of wax figure technology in cultural exhibits into the second half of the 20th century with the invention of animatronics. Third, this project establishes these two elements, audio animatronics and their themed environments, as the rich primary sources that represent a greater modern consumer culture. Finally, this video investigates depictions of the other in 20th century theme parks and amusement parks. I argue that themed entertainment corporations attempted to approximate bodies through animatronic technology. However, the dehumanization of Western representations of non-white and non-Western bodies persists as a continuity from the public World's Fair tradition into the private theme park industry. Because of the complex nature of weaving together multiple histories, this video will be organized in multiple parts. First and second are the historiography and methods, whereby I further establish that theme park attractions and other park elements are rich, useful, and accessible primary sources. The third section investigates the changing contexts of wax and animatronic exhibitions, from diplomatic World's Fairs to corporate theme parks. The fourth part is a history of wax figures that extends into the second half of the 20th century with animatronics. What follows are 4 case studies that apply this method in order to understand how this imagination-informing industry constructs and reflects racial representation for Western construction. The history of the historical interpretation. This video intersects multiple histories on multiple subjects including theme parks, World's Fairs, wax figures, robotics, and the body. These subjects are worth studying together because these elements are inextricably linked to understanding late 20th century visual culture. The study of theme parks is mainly relegated to the field of American studies, and historians little analyze theme parks in international contexts. This video adds some European attractions as primary sources to add to the conversation, but it focuses exclusively on Western theme parks. After all, almost all World's Fairs were hosted by Western nations, notably until Osaka Expo 70 in Japan, the first World's Fair in Asia. There is some research on Japanese theme parks, but not much else about parks in the non-West. Within the West, the study of the American theme park is a recent development across the disciplines, but historians infrequently research them. In the 2000s, Dr. Margaret J. King wrote some of the premier analysis on theme parks as products of American culture. She defined the theme park as a social artwork designed as a 4-dimensional symbolic landscape, evoking impressions of places and times, real and imaginary. Theme parks differ from amusement parks in that they rely on themed environments rather than solely providing amusement. Theme parks are immersive places of experience, whereas with amusement parks, thrills are relatively cheap. Theming is the art of evoking instant moods. For instance, dark rides move throughout a course of vignettes, positioning guests and directing their attention to symbols, physical sensations, and stories. Themed environments and attractions are unique mediums because they activate all the senses. Overall, I agree with King's assertion that the theme park should be considered as prominent, even central, American cultural icons, not only because they are popular forms, but because they offer an index to culture in themselves. theme parks should be considered among the most significant social artworks of the 20th century. Theme parks are rich four-dimensional primary sources that have massive impacts on the public and cultural consciousness. The most comprehensive study that linked theme parks to the World's Fair tradition was conducted by Steve Nelson on Epcot, which opened its gates 4 years prior to his 1986 article. Nelson draws an important through line between the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago with Epcot itself. The division of Epcot into two themed lands, Future World and World Showcase, directly aligns with the division of the 1893 World's Fair into the White City and the Midway. Chicago's White City was a monumental and idealized vision of the future, where manufactured items took center stage. Much like Epcot, mechanized presentations and colossal displays fascinated and entertained, all while selling a product. In Epcot, Test Track is sponsored by Chevrolet, Kodak sponsored the Imagination Pavilion, and Siemens sponsored Spaceship Earth. This is a continuity from the 1964 World's Fair, wherein Ford sponsored the Magic Skyway, General Electric sponsored the Carousel of Progress, and Pepsi sponsored It's a Small World. As for the Midway and World Showcase, this paper draws more from Steve Nelson on Epcot in the section linking the 1893 streets of Cairo with attractions that simulate the Middle East and the so-called Orient. I disagree with Nelson in that each country's MIDI pavilion is worth studying. Nelson claimed that discussing the specific features of each mini country is pointless, since all are cosmetic overlays of the same theme. The world's cultural diversity can be reduced to variations in costume, language, and diet. This argument is uncharitable because each and every pavilion at Epcot has specific elements with significances worth uncovering. Nelson was still correct in his assertion that each pavilion in Epcot is more representative of Americanness than foreignness, as they are filled with Coca-Cola, t-shirts, and souvenirs. Randall Shepard's analysis of Epcot's Mexico Pavilion disagrees with Nelson's method, not by questioning authenticity for tourist attractions, but instead looking at how nations defined their authentic version of tourism that is later brought to Western audiences through theme parks. Attractions based on real-life spaces must pass the tourist's test of recognizable authenticity. According to one of Shepard's interviewed sources who worked on the Mexico Pavilion, it was very difficult to convey that guests coming to the park want to see preconceived ideas of the world as opposed to factual realities. Shepard's method understands that the country's own authentic definition of tourism informs the simulation's version of authentic. Dr. Jamie Comstock-Skip identified a major blind spot in studies that link World's Fairs to theme parks, in which scholars tend to ignore specific park features and/or do not use attractions as exemplary primary sources. Comstock-Skip focused her analysis on one attraction, Indiana Jones' Adventure at Disneyland, to make a greater argument about temples as pavilions. This inquiry is informed by this exact blind spot in the historiography, centering attractions and park elements as the key primary sources. While this paper does not limit itself to probing about one attraction, it specifically pins down audio animatronics as theme park elements worth studying. The project most closely aligned with this one is definitely Malia Holmes' Simulated Imperialism. Holm draws from Beauregard to acknowledge theme parks as works of simulacra and the hyper-real. She looks inquisitively into the 1964 Disney classic attraction, It's a Small World, which debuted at the 1964 World's Fair, sponsored by Pepsi. Holm defines the three interlocking operations of simulated imperialism as the signification of imperial processes generated by simulacra, the amplification of colonizing projects through simulation, and the interpolation of hybrid subjects articulated between immobility and inanimation. Holm notes the limited movements of the colonized subjects, the non-Western dolls within It's a Small World. Each continent is relegated to its own room where the dolls sing in each language, a cacophony. However, in the final scene, all the dolls are dressed in white, singing in English and dancing together. Quite literally, the finale whitewashes. Disney represented the simulated colonized subjects as children, continuing the colonial pattern of commodity racism. Holm importantly notes that we, the guests, are subjects ourselves. This fact informs much of the study. Fixed into mechanized boats, immobile, they, the guests, become obedient cogs, within the infrastructure of a greater simulated imperialist superstructure, Disney's empire. Because of home, I acknowledge how themed entertainment corporations surveil guests on the attractions, ordering them to keep their hands and feet inside the boat at all times. We cannot be full subjects without mobility, so home reminds us that the attraction systems are the subjects worth studying. This project on theme parks is also one that extends the history of wax figures into the latter half of the 20th century. Both ethnographic wax figures and animatronics were key elements throughout the history of World's Fairs, so there was already scholarship on the exhibition of the other, through uncanny forms like wax figures and mannequins. In 2016, Professor of German Dana A. Weber argued that wax figures deeply intertwines the fields of visual arts, physical anthropology, and ethnology in Germany and elsewhere during the 20th century. Weber outlines a dichotomy between the uncanniness innate to a body with no life and vivification of these figures becoming more lifelike. By displaying cultural artifacts in a depersonalized manner, the wax figure invites an objectifying, oftentimes colonial, and leveling perspective in contemplation. This video aligns with and spiritually continues Weber's approach, selecting animatronics as the next logical iteration of bodily simulation. Weber, however, did not take this approach. She instead investigated digital bodies made with three-dimensional computer-generated digital animation. It makes much more sense to subsequently study the audio animatronic because they move vivaciously, but they often are depersonalized figures. Methods and purpose. One of the leading goals of this research project is to further establish theme parks, theme park attractions, and themed lands as useful primary sources for understanding material culture, and in this case, myths of other places and peoples. According to Richard Francaviglia and his essay on the significance of imagineered historical places, theme parks interpret the design of historic landscapes they supposedly recreate. Although, theme parks are first and foremost a business that profits from attendance, and companies generate and grow attendance by investing in new attractions. These new attractions are both a window and a mirror that shines light on and reflects society's symbols. They conversely manufacture new symbols to reflect society's demands and desires in the name of profit. Sourcing was a major challenge for this research project, but the power of the internet proved useful, for guests have been documenting their local theme parks through fan blogs and creating their own digital archives. Photographs are key primary sources, as visitors constantly take pictures to remember their vacations with their friends and family. The private nature of these themed entertainment corporations makes it difficult to access their archives. Similarly, it is difficult to consult those who created these attractions and pavilions due to deaths, continuing relationships with theme park companies, or personal reasons. I sadly do not have access to the Walt Disney Company's digital archives, but it is not impossible for independent researchers to gain access, pending approval. This approval seems rare, even for professional academics. Cooperations with these companies remains difficult. Luckily, theme park fans have been documenting these vacation destinations and compiling them into digital archives dedicated to each local amusement. One fan, Werner Weiss, curates Yesterland, a blog centered around Disneyland and Walt Disney World's past attractions. Even less prominent theme parks have their own fan history websites. Great Adventure History, which seeks to celebrate the history of the world's largest seasonal theme park. This digital archive is especially impressive, compiling together press releases, souvenirs, and countless photographs of individual attractions, backstage areas, and even restrooms. The accessibility of digitized primary sources benefits all inquiries into theme parks' cultural, economic, and social significance. To overcome these databases' lack of professionalization, I scrutinized point-of-view POV videos of attractions on YouTube to confirm informal written descriptions of attractions' show scenes. While the digital primary source collection is unique, I subjected them to traditional historical analysis of close reading and interpretation. The sources and descriptions are new, but the analysis is traditional, using applied, established historical theories discussed later in the video. This video uses theme park attractions as primary sources to investigate construction of racial differences. This is one of the countless ways that theme park attractions, as material culture and a storytelling medium, can be useful tools for historical inquiry. Furthermore, this project pays special attention to audio animatronic reproductions of the human body. Using the animatronics in bodily histories can unlock new understandings of race, gender, disability, beauty, masculinity, age, and the fat body. The animatronic opens up questions about performance, labor, mechanization, and the post-Anthropocene. Theme parks sit at the intersection between a multitude of gazes, much like photographs and other visual culture. I adapted Jane Collins and Catherine Lutz's The Photograph as an intersection of gazes in order to analyze the theme park. Theme park designers take the photographer's gaze. The photographer responds to what is sometimes a profound alienation from the people being photographed, and may feel compelled to put the camera between themselves and whatever is remarkable that they encounter. The magazine's gaze relates to how themed entertainment corporations brand themselves in print, like advertisements, maps, and press releases. The reader's gaze becomes the guest's gaze. What draws their attention and informs their behavior in a highly simulated environment? There can be explicitly Western and non-Western gazes, wherein the Westerners are always explorers, scientists, officials, or tourists. The complicating factor is that the animatronics in this study lack agency and candidness, limited by software, hardware, and their creative inputs. The biases are encoded. From World's Fairs to theme parks. As mentioned in the Historiography, private theme parks are the spiritual successors of diplomatic World's Fairs. Disneyland and Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom developed alongside the fairs, and theme park designers constructed many exhibitions at the 1964 World's Fair. Around the same time that the World's Fairs died out, arguably after the failure of the 1984 Louisiana World Exhibition, more theme parks and amusement parks popped up around the United States, Europe, and globally. The American roller coaster boom began only 10 years after the 1964 World's Fair and continued until 1980. This transition of prominence also kept attraction design and urban planning in the hands of themed entertainment corporations. Finally, and most importantly for this video, both World's Fairs and theme parks were and are sites where wax figures and animatronics reside. World's Fairs and theme parks were sites not only for animatronic performers, but they were also the site where nations and corporations used living or animatronic performers to construct their identity during rising internationalism. Jamie Comstock Skip noticed how this process played out on the ground level. International exhibitions were places to see and be seen in, allowing visitors to internalize the linear trajectory between savagery and civilization. But Disney takes this line and gives it another dimension in the name of fantasy. World's Fair pavilions were, and theme park attractions are, simulacra that blurred the lines between real and fiction. The result is hyperreal. In the words of Eric Sandweiss about the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition, the Japanese pavilion became Japan. The streets of Cairo became Egypt. Both World's Fairs and theme parks simplify a complex world. World's Fairs are also entangled with theme parks because they fundamentally rely on modern urban planning practices. Disney's name is equally important to American urban history as the names of Levitt, Moses, and Olmsted. Theme parks and World Fairs are planned and artificial spaces. Richard Francaviglia understood how Disney and his team employed a number of important traditional European and American planning designs, creating the hub-and-spoke layout of Disneyland and its reproductions. World's Fairs and theme parks also enclosed guests with planned sightlines, some parks even using dirt berms. Walt Disney, among all other theme park designers, was an urban planner who understood the World's Fair tradition. A major difference between World's Fairs and theme parks are their lifespans, as incidental structures made up the pavilions. The World's Fairs, unlike most theme parks, invited international participation, for guest nations to build special exhibit pavilions that also housed administrative staff, revealing how growing economic interdependence came a common sense of proper behavior, a slowly cohering set of standards by which measure a people's attainment of civility. The incidental nature of World's Fairs remained a continuity, but it also meant that the fairs did not guarantee a profit. Theme parks are different from fairs because their investment is made with a 5, 10, or 20-year plan. Theme parks and World's Fairs have a deeply entangled story because they both exhibit. The 1964 New York World's Fair was an important event in the Disney Company's corporate history of its parks division, as they debuted multiple attractions that they later transplanted into their parks. Behold, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, the first attraction that utilized a humanoid audio animatronic. The Illinois' Land of Lincoln Pavilion at the New York World's Fair hosted the robotic president, who delivered his famous Gettysburg Address. The first mechanical and animated reproduction of the human form, Mr. Lincoln performed thousands of times throughout his lifespan, before being replaced by an electric and not pneumatic version of himself.